Police there speaking in Mildura just a short time ago. So just to put that in perspective, because that was the New South Wales policeman just talking about what happened his side of the border. It started in Victoria at a town called Redcliffs, just south of Mildura, around 12:30 yesterday. A woman's body was found there, an 82-year-old woman found dead there. And then an hour later, police were called to that property at Rufus, just near the South Australian border, where they found the body of a man. And then later on that property found the man with self-inflicted gunshot wounds who's in a critical condition in Melbourne now. It's being described as a family dispute. So questions are being raised about the safety record of airline Lion Air after this week's disaster north of Jakarta, which claimed the lives of 189 people. Indonesia correspondent Ann Barker joins us now from Jakarta. And so still no sign of the main body of the plane?
No, Joe. You can see behind me there's another ship that's about to go out and take the next sort of team of search and rescue staff. There have been hundreds of people out at the crash site a few kilometres from the port here that have been working around the clock. My understanding is they started with a fairly narrow sort of field that they were searching on day one. Each day that they haven't found the fuselage, they've increased the radius of that area somewhat to try and find the fuselage on the seabed. Now, it's not particularly deep waters. We're talking about 30 to 35 metres. So it's more a matter of just finding where exactly that fuselage has gone down. They are using underwater drones and sort of echo-sounding equipment, and also divers have been in the water today and yesterday. So I think the hope is that certainly they will find the fuselage today and be able to retrieve those black boxes.
Yeah, that was my next question actually, that water depth, because when I heard a couple of days ago that it went down in waters 35 metres deep, it sounded relatively shallow, and you would have thought it would have been pretty straightforward to find because there was the debris field there as well. But yeah, it's obviously difficult to do so, and the key is finding that black box flight recorder.
Yeah, I think everybody expected the fuselage would have been found very quickly, especially as there was quite a large debris field on day one. You can see behind me more of the personal belongings and some of the wreckage of the plane that was found on the surface of the sea. A lot of it was brought in overnight. There have been ships coming back sort of all night and depositing some of that stuff. We understand that everything that was on the surface has now been brought in, and it's very much an underwater search now. They are using those ping locators, as they're called, to try and track the flight recorders, because they put out a ping of some sort for about a month. So you'd expect that too would have given some guidance as to where the fuselage is, but it might suggest that it's not quite where they're searching, and they may have to expand that search field again.
Yeah. And are Boeing officials arriving today, and are any questions being asked about the safety of this type of aircraft, or is it generally being perceived that there was some kind of maintenance issue or pilot error?
Look, that's the big question, Joe, that won't be answered until we retrieve those flight recorders. But today is very much about the investigation. You're right, I understand there is a team of Boeing officials that will meet with Indonesian officials here today. The Air Lion management have big questions about the 737 MAX 8 that went down. The fact that it was a very new plane, it had only been delivered to Lion Air sort of 2 months or 3 months earlier, and had only got about 800 flying hours on the log. So there are questions about whether it was some default in the plane's design. The Indonesian Transport Minister has ordered an inspection of all the 737 MAX 8 planes in Indonesia. Apparently Lion Air has about 11, Garuda Air has at least 1. There may well be others. And certainly the technical issues that seem to have been a factor in the crash that were reported by the pilot in the minutes before it went down also suggest there could have been issues with the plane, whether it was a maintenance issue or a failing in the repair work that was done the night before. We're yet to know.
And just to make this clear, that those types of planes aren't grounded in Indonesia at the moment. They're continuing doing their work, but they're just being inspected?
That's the understanding, that there's no plane grounded. They just want to inspect them to see what the problem was, and to see, if they should be grounded, in fact.
Yeah. And just explain for us the impact of this terrible accident there in Indonesia, with these families still waiting to get possessions and to be able to bury their loved ones.
Yeah, there was a big crowd of relatives at the both the police hospital where a lot of the remains have been taken for identification, and also at the Harlium Air Force Base where people have been waiting at a crisis centre for any news at all of the fuselage being found and many of the bodies that are believed to be on board. Some of those relatives have been asked to give DNA samples via saliva and so on. Identification is particularly difficult just because so many bodies are not intact, and that's particularly harrowing, obviously, for the family members that are waiting there. You know, we're hearing stories of a father who was on board with his very small son. There were 2 babies on board. You know, one man who never flown or never did fly, always avoided flying with Lion Air and had to fly at the last minute because it was his wife's birthday and he needed to get home very quickly. So all of those personal stories, I think, are starting to emerge, which just make this crash all the more tragic.
Yeah. Okay, Anne Barker reporting there from Jakarta.